Shortly after the end of that conflict, the Grand Administrator was taken into custody whilst trying to order a vessel to load up for her escape, finding that the men were suddenly refusing to follow her orders, and thus was stuck, and eventually arrested by the same men she was trying to order around. Delius, by this point in time, had allowed the 6 individuals who were attempting to assail him to be taken into custody, and made it just in time to see the Grand Administrator be placed into the transport bound for a controlled imprisonment facility to await trial. As she was sat down inside, firmly cuffed, she stared out of the open back entryway to the criminal transport unit, right out at Delius with a furious glare. Simply because you are powerful does not make you any less a fool. In seeking to protect everyone, you will save no one in the end, Delius, despite all your strength. Oh, and just so you know, that little plan about sedating Hagara, it was all rubbish. No matter what way we calculate it, we haven't the means, the technology, or the understanding of such a beast to sedate it. We can't even fathom the amount of sedative one would need to do so. It's impossible. It was only something that we came up with to pacify you. Eventually, the core world will awaken, and with all of us trapped here, it will be the end of everything, and your strength will do nothing to stop it. And when all the world crashes down around you, Delius, I will be there to smile as you crumble. The Grand Administrator said, gritting her teeth, staring out at Delius, as the doors closed and she was ferried away to her imprisonment facility. Finally, the matter had been settled. Soon a new ring of elections would be held to crown a new Grand Administrator and replace the officials working under them. However, their original problems were no closer to being solved. The Grand Administrator was right about one thing. Eventually, Hagara would be awakening. And if her statements about sedating him were true, then they were right back at square one, with no reasonable means of prolonging the awakening of Hagara. In truth, after hearing this, Delius's first thought was of his own people. How long could he prolong these events? Eventually, he would need to return home to ensure the safety of his people, to undergo the trial and journey, to gather the resources needed, resources that only become available once Hagara begins to awaken. But for the time being in this faster stream of time would work to his advantage, or at least he hoped it would. Give him more time, more options. For so many generations, his people had simply decided to bear the destruction, danger, and losses that come during the awakening of Hagara. But for the first time, Delius was experiencing something different. The learning of these outer worlds, their cultures and ideas, for some reason seemed to give him a spark of hope. A hope that there could be a better way, that no longer would his people have to suffer the awakening of Hagara, that they could find a new path, one where such sacrifices were no longer necessary, where the hardships that his people had to face were simply a thing of the past, and that he could do so within the frame of his own beliefs, without killing Hagara or harming him. He is a living creature after all. What right have they to take away his life, other than to just protect their own? If it is possible to save them both, then that is truly what his heart desired. However, there was a long way to go in order to achieve that goal. Delius thought to himself, as for the time being, he began to make his way back to Asa, who had been waiting for him to return from his encounter with the Grand Administrator and her followers. Eventually, Delius made his way back to the apartment where Asa was supposed to be waiting for him. Delius arrived at the door, knocking on it as before, as he heard Asa's voice from inside. Who is it? It's Delius, he replied, a bit curious as to why Asa didn't just answer the door. Oh, thank God. Delius, come in. The door is locked. Just break it, Asa shouted from inside. Believing that Asa might be in some sort of trouble, he did as she requested, simply twisting the doorknob slightly, as the metal it was composed of warped under the pressure, breaking apart as he made his way through the door easily, to find Asa's apartment in complete shambles, even more so than when he had first arrived. Now, things thrown about, broken and smashed, walls torn to pieces, the ceiling with craters and holes in it, and the walls and floors no different, the entire place looking like it had been smashed to pieces, as Asa lay there, still in the center of the room. Delius, I'm not gonna lie, I might have done something a little bit silly, and I'm in a bit of trouble as I can't move, Asa said as Delius approached rapidly, running to Asa's side and kneeling down beside her. Asa, what happened? Did someone do something to you? Are you all right? Why can't you move? Delius asked frantically as he looked about to Asa, checking her over and finding that she didn't seem to have any injuries, though her clothes were torn in places. Other than that, she seemed to be fine. Yeah, well, someone did do something to me. The only problem was, it was me. And I suppose I can't move wouldn't be an exact or accurate term of reference. A more apt phrase would be that I can move. However, the side effects are far more drastic than I'd like them to be. What are you talking about, Asa? Delius said, still extremely worried. Well, Delius, do you know those cellular clusters that you brought by here after you crashed the facility and stole them? Yes. What about them? Well, I took them. What? Delius said, shocked, as he stared down at Asa. Why would you do that? Asa, don't tell me you're power-hungry too. Thought I could trust you. Don't be ridiculous, Delius. I am not power-hungry. I don't have some desire to steal the strength of the gods or some nonsense like that. This is purely scientific. How? Delius replied. Well, quite frankly, one of our primary problems is that it's impossible to do any hardcore research on the surface of Hagara. It's been one of our major roadblocks in trying to find any sort of solution. Trying to scan from outside of the atmosphere, which honestly is far too close. We have to be much farther away in order to keep from being pulled in by Hagara's magnetic or gravitational pull. Lots of distance is required. And even with the teleporter, we're extremely limited. The probes that we send can only take visual scans. They can't actually take samples or make analysis. It's all completely useless. In order to make headway, we need to do scientific research on the ground. That's how all scientific advancement is truly achieved. It's not sitting back in a laboratory and staring at a monitor. No, it's getting your hands dirty, getting right into the thick of it. That's where real scientific discovery is made. How real progress is achieved. The lab work is simply the fun stuff that's attached. So, what we need is a scientist who can actually survive on the surface of Hagara, which until recently was completely impossible. Before, those cellular clusters were going to be scattered amongst some soldiers, so they could complete military operations on the surface. They would be extremely weakened, and probably lackluster for speed, but their higher frame rate of time would probably give them somewhat of an edge. At least that was the hope. But I've decided to go a different route, Asa said, as she smiled up at Delius from the floor.